Hi, this is Rick Levine with your mid-month update for August of 2020. Normally, these mid-month updates go out to the Patreon supporters at the $3 a month level, but occasionally I make them available to everyone, and this month's is going to be released to the public, so feel free to share it. There's just some important things going on that I want to make sure that everyone can learn about, everyone can know about, because I'm going to spend some time talking about the second half of the month of August between now and the beginning of September. But I'm also going to take a look at a larger arc of what happens between now and the beginning of the year with respect to Mars in particular, because Mars is so much in the highlight today, this week, this month, and from now until the end of the year. And soon you will see why. So I'd like to begin by jumping right in and looking at a chart for the new moon. And the new moon is at 10:41 p.m. and that's Eastern Daylight Time on August 18th. I'm recording this the morning of August 18th. And so we're looking at a chart for the new moon on August 18th. Okay, so we are now looking at a chart for the new moon in Leo, and the new moon is at 26 degrees of Leo, and you can see that it is close to Mercury at 28 degrees of Leo. The chart that we're looking at is based on an Aries rising wheel, which means that it doesn't have a location. It's good wherever you are on the planet. At 10:41 p.m. Eastern Time, that's for New York. You need to just adjust your time zone accordingly, and the new moon will be at 26 degrees of Leo, whatever time your clock says, and all the planets will be correctly located here, but there will be no respect to houses at all or a horizon. It's just based upon a natural chart, so that the houses of the chart go along and follow the natural wheel from Aries all the way around through Pisces. So the chart that we're looking at in some ways holds a piece of the puzzle that I really want to focus on. But I wanted to begin with the new moon chart because the new moon every month is a seed for the weeks to follow. At the time of the new moon, we create intentions, whether we realize it or not. We make things up in our mind. We take actions. We do things that set in motion patterns that can stick with us throughout the month. In fact, the patterns continue to build in intensity and in development through to the full moon. And the full moon occurs actually on September 2nd, so we won't talk about that in depth. That's next month. But the energy building between now and the 2nd of September comes to a fruition then. And then for the next couple of weeks, the energy begins to pull in and focus and get ready for the following new moon in Virgo. So the reason why we're starting with this new moon, well, A, is because the new moon is always that seed period, and a new moon in Leo is a creative seed. It's a seed that we plant in the heart of self-expression. Leo is connected with the sun, and the sun is the center or the heart of our solar system. And when the sun and the moon align, in some ways it means that how we exude energy, how we radiate our light, the sun, and how we receive the light of what's around us, how we reflect on our environment, how we feel, how the emotions that we experience in our inner world. The objective sun and the subjective moon are in focus, which gives us an ability to create in that moment. And this moment in Leo is about that which we express. It's the summer sun that makes the flowers bloom and at their brightest. They're They're shining like the sun. They're exuding their energy. And so the new moon in Leo is always a time of maximum creative energy. Now, this particular new moon is given a very powerful boost by its trine to Mars. Technically, it's after the trine, meaning that the sun trined Mars a couple of days ago, and the moon trines Mars about 4 hours prior to the new moon. However, it's still within range that it's picking up that energy. And what does this mean? This means that the new moon is getting a boost from the fiery, ardent, impulsive, expressive, heroic, feisty, assertive Mars at home in Aries. Now, normally, Mars whizzes through a sign in a couple of months. And yet, because of the retrograde, and this is what we're going to come back to in a few moments, because of the retrograde position or phase of the planet Mars, Mars will end up being in Aries for 6 months, actually over 6 months. And because of that, Mars is over amping in Aries because it's naturally expressive in its home sign. And then when it turns retrograde on September 9th, and we'll get to the details of that in just a few minutes, even though that's next month, that's really what we want to do, is we want to get the larger picture on Mars in this little presentation. But Mars in Aries is incredibly powerful right now, and it's channeling its power, its enthusiasm, its need to dominate, to win the war, if you will. Mars, that fiery, impulsive energy, is harmonizing or trining that creative Leo new moon. And the other piece of this is that Mars at the same time is in this process of a month-long square to the Capricorn Council, the Capricorn staff meeting, the Capricorn Board of Directors that consists of Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn, who have been convening, have been holding council in Capricorn for what might seem way too long. But the meeting really began back in December of 2017, when Saturn entered Capricorn. Pluto was already there. And then just last year, Jupiter entered the picture. And of course, we've had this ongoing dance of Saturn conjuncting Pluto back in January, and then Jupiter catching up with and conjuncting Pluto in April, and then Saturn moving into Aquarius and turning retrograde, Jupiter turning retrograde, meeting up with Pluto for a second time. Now Jupiter is backed up before Pluto, and we'll see why this is important in just a few minutes. And so what's happened this month is that Mars has already made squares with Jupiter and with Pluto, and is still coming into a square with Saturn. And even though the dates, and we'll get to exact dates soon enough, but even though the dates, none of them are exact at this new moon, the fact of the matter is that Mars, in fiery and impulsive and ardent Aries, intuitive, it burns like a fire, it just does it. Mars in Aries is dealing with this consistency of being checked by squares to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. So even though we have Mars feeding into this new moon with excitement, the other piece of this puzzle is that the new moon at 26 degrees of Leo is exactly quincunx, that's 5/12, that's the thick green line, it's quincunx to Saturn. And so we see this triangle between the new moon in Leo with a quincunx to Saturn that is back to squaring Mars 2 degrees away from exact, and exact, it will be exact later this month, but of course Mars is in between the squares to Pluto and Saturn. So we have the Mars squaring Saturn, and then we follow that triangle all the way around, and we get to the blue line between Mars and the new moon. So this triangle is a bit of awkward energy because it it emphasizes what a quincunx is. And a quincunx is basically an aspect of ill adjustment. Ptolemy said that when two planets were 5/12 of the cycle apart, that the planets couldn't even see each other. It's like oil and water; they don't mix because they're not in each other's vision. And so we have this creative Leo new moon that is not seeing the restriction, the restraint, the authority, the holding back, the importance of the structure of Saturn. And the reason we can see how a quincunx works so clearly here is that whenever you have a quincunx, you have points that are trine one side of the quincunx and square the other, which is what Mars is doing right now, which means that on one hand, the energy works. The trine says it's smooth, it's flowing smoothly, and yet the Mars squaring Pluto and squaring Saturn says it doesn't work because Mars is bumping into these power structures of Pluto Saturn that are restraining it and preventing it from just going off and doing its thing. So here's the lesson, or the thing to think about in this new moon, is that we have a creative seed to plant, but it may take time for it to come to fruition because Saturn and Pluto are holding back that energy through those quincunxes. And there's one other piece in this, and that is that the planet Mercury is also involved in this new moon. This new moon is conjuncting Mercury. In fact, the moon will come into its conjunction with Mercury just about 4 hours after the new moon. And so Mercury is so significant that there's this whole communication piece. There's this intellectual mental piece, which in some ways says that the seeds that we plant are being planted in words. It's what we're saying now is very important, because verbally what we're saying in our speech and what we're writing either by pen or pencil or by email or by text, what we're putting down in words, this is where our intentions are being stated. This is what's planting the seeds for the fruition. And yet we have to understand that if we try to realize that too quickly, we'll end up just being frustrated because of the Mars square to the Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, and because of the new moon's quincunx to Saturn in particular. While we're on the new moon, though, let's also make a note that Venus, which is now moving through Cancer, and Venus will become very significant later in the month, because as Venus moves through Cancer, it will oppose Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, just like Mars has been this month squaring Jupiter and Pluto and yet coming to Saturn. And in fact, that Venus will end up making a square to Mars also. So Venus moving through Cancer is normally quiet. Venus in Cancer says, if you love me, you should know what I want. I don't have to ask. Venus in Cancer is the love of feeling secure. And this Venus in Cancer just a few days ago squared Chiron, which may have brought up some issues of healing or issues of uncertainty or insecurity tied to our past. But Venus is technically past that square. And yet at the time of the new moon, Venus is also making a sextile with Uranus. And this becomes another piece of the puzzle, a piece of how we attack, and Mars certainly is the planet of attack, how we attack our plan this month. And with Venus sextile Uranus, it suggests that our most useful line of attack will be something that is extraordinary, innovative, out of the box, other than normal, eccentric, unorthodox, futuristic, because Venus in Cancer, although it can be very quiet and very receptive, when Venus trines Uranus, there's that electric breakthrough new idea thing that happens that in a way says we don't have to shout our new idea from the mountaintop. But we need to connect with what's important. We need to place a value on those things that we cherish and those things that we want to work toward, because those are the things that are going to be the most important. And it's not based upon what someone told us to do. It's Venus sextile Uranus. It's based upon that sense of what we desire, without respect to the normal etiquette or rules. It's that the feeling that we have when we can express ourselves and feel loved for who we are, even if we are different. I'm going to move this chart ahead day by day in just a moment. But what I would like to do before we do that is get to the theme that I said early on that I was going to be looking at, and that theme has to do with Mars. And the theme of Mars is very interesting because Mars entered Aries back at the end of June. On June 27th, Mars moved into Aries. And at that time, when Mars moved into Aries, Mars was actually making a sextile with Saturn that had just moved into, Saturn had moved into Aquarius. It was turning retrograde, but it was still in Aquarius. So when Mars entered Aries on June 27th, Mars was forming an exact sextile with Saturn, and we're going to see why that's so significant as we unfold the rest of this year. So moving on, as Mars is moving forward, again, Mars normally just spends a couple months in each sign, but Mars moved forward, and by August 4th, that's the beginning of this month, August, Mars had reached 19 degrees of Aries. And at 19 degrees of Aries, Mars was forming an exact square with Jupiter, which had retrograded back to 19 degrees of Capricorn. Now, this is about overdoing. This is about exuberance. This is about overreaction. This is about enthusiasm that's overflowing the top. Because Mars is excitement and enthusiasm, and Jupiter is the magnifying lens. I'm not going to dwell real long on these because I want to paint the whole picture here. But as that Mars moves on, now Mars is slowing down because Mars is getting ready to turn retrograde on September 9th. And by August 13th, Mars at 23 degrees of Aries is now squaring, or just recently squared, Pluto at 23 degrees of Capricorn. And so Mars squaring Pluto is very different than Mars squaring Jupiter, because Mars squaring Jupiter is optimistic and encouraging. And Mars squaring Pluto is like, oh my God, this is deeper than I thought it was. Mars squaring Pluto dredges up fears and power and resistance and stuff that's been hidden, that's been buried. And as it comes to the surface, often it's way more than we imagined. It's like we feel like we can feel like we're in over our head. The key with Mars-Pluto aspects, certainly with squares, but with any Mars-Pluto aspects, is the temptation to turn it into a power struggle where we end up on top. We meaning you or me or one of us, you or I, one of us individually. Mars and Pluto together do not work very well when it comes to individualistic dominance. In fact, Mars-Pluto will almost always backfire, because what it does is it conjures up resistance from others. It's like you can be coming on too hard, too fast, too confident, and what happens is someone says, we got to stop this guy, we got to stop this woman, this is not okay. And so what happens is we find that we're stirring up resistance that we don't even know why we're bumping into it. But Mars square Pluto, certainly it can be power struggles. Now, this is all in the recent past. This occurred exactly on August 13th. Now, as that Mars continues to move forward, remember, we move through the new moon. The new moon has Mars having moved forward just a degree. It's at 24 degrees of Aries at the new moon. But as that Mars continues to move forward, by the 24th, Mars reaches 26 degrees of Aries. And as it reaches 26 degrees of Aries, it makes an exact square with Saturn at 26 degrees of Capricorn. Now, Mars and Saturn is a Mars square Pluto is not a fun combination either. But Mars square Saturn is classically a tough one because Mars says yes and Saturn says no. Mars says go, Saturn says stop. Mars says hit the gas, Saturn says up, here's the brake. There's a kind of a frustration, an uneven forward, backward, herky-jerky, can't get the rhythm right, because that Mars in Aries is hot to trot. It's waiting for that starting gate to open, and when it does, it's whoosh, it's the launch, it's the rocket ship taking off, and Saturn goes, nope, launch has been delayed. And so when Mars hits the square to Saturn, we might feel a sense of frustration. In fact, we may already feel it. We may feel it all month because Mars is in orb of these squares from Jupiter to Pluto to Saturn all month. And that's the point that I'm trying to make here, is that we can't take out one date out of this whole thing and say, oh, today is Mars square Saturn, because we're running up into this situation where we're going to feel that maximum resistance by the end of the month, by August 24th. Then Mars moves through that square, and we might feel, oh, here's some breathing room. I can actually move forward. Now we'll zoom in on this and we'll detail this a little bit more in a few minutes. But I want to jump ahead because on September 9th, Mars at 28 degrees. Now, Mars hasn't moved that far. I mean, in a few weeks, in a couple of weeks, Mars has only moved a couple of degrees because it's slowing down to turn retrograde. Those of you who know my work have heard me say many times that when planets slow down, they gain power. It's the slowest moving planets, the Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, have more weight in their movement than the faster moving planets, which are like the moon or sun, Mercury, Venus, even Mars. But when planets slow down, they gain heaviness. This is the meaning of a chronic versus an acute illness, where chronic is chronos, meaning Saturn, or slower, and the acute is something can flare up, but if it's Mercury, it flares up and then it's gone. So on September 9th, Mars actually makes its station. It's like a pendulum changing direction. In order to change direction, it's moving really fast, and then as it gets to the top of its arc, it has to slow down, and then it has to come to a complete stop, as it does on September 9th. And then it begins turning the other way from Earth's perspective. It looks like it does. And at first it moves very slowly, and then it begins to build speed, and then it goes maximum speed until it slows down retrograde and does the same thing and then moves direct again. So the key here to understand is that on September 9th, Mars begins to pull back. And we'll feel this because even though it's not exact, we're going to sense that Mars is pulling back toward another square to Saturn. You see, Mars is going to run through the squares to the Capricorn Council meeting, but it'll do it in reverse. Whereas going ahead, it was the optimism of Jupiter, the power struggle of Pluto, and then the reality of the structures that are in our way, Saturn. And now Mars is squaring that Saturn. It turns retrograde, but it's going to back into it. And it actually backs into it on September 29th. Saturn has retrograded back a little bit, before it was at 26 degrees. Now it's just inched back to 25 degrees. In fact, Saturn right now on September 29th is making its station. In fact, Jupiter's moved direct already by the end of September. Saturn is getting ready to move direct, and Pluto will turn direct. These move one at a time, and this movement ahead of let me get this right, of Saturn moving direct on September 28th, and of Jupiter having moved direct on September 12th, and Pluto moving direct not until October 4th. But you can see here that on September 29th, when Mars retrogrades, Mars retrograde makes that square to Saturn, it's at 25 degrees of Capricorn. Now, Mars is still moving pretty slowly, but Mars begins to build speed. And by October 9th, Mars has backed up to 22 degrees of Aries, and now it's making that square with Pluto again. And we go, oh no, it's not just hitting the wall. Now we got the resistance of this whole undertow of this secret manipulative stuff of this power struggle, and it's really getting intense. Now, obviously, you can read whatever you want to into this as we come up to the presidential election in the United States. And in fact, I think that this will be one way we will see this manifest, but I don't think it'll be the only way. So October 9th, Mars now squares Pluto for the second time. And then we continue moving that ahead. And by October 18th, Mars squares Jupiter. This may be a bit of a break in the madness. It may be a little bit of optimism. It also may be like an, oh my God, things were awful, and I can't believe now with the magnifying lens on it, how crazy or how awful things really are. I don't know. I mean, as an astrologer, I get to look at the rhythms, but I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know how this will play out. Although I think it's interesting as we follow it through, we will see, I think, a very strong glimmer of what I would call hope in this whole process. Nevertheless, on October 18th, retrograde Mars squares Jupiter. And again, we have another play of this optimism or overdoing or overindulgence. And in some ways, it's like the volume is turned up so loud we can't even understand how it can get any louder. Mars continues to move backward, but it's past the alignments, the squares with Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter. And by November 13, this is the pendulum having gone this way. Now the pendulum moving backwards, it slows down. And on November 13, Mars holds still. It makes a station as it turns from retrograde back to direct motion. Mars is at 15 degrees of Aries when it does this. And so Mars backs up to 15 degrees of Aries, begins to turn direct at that point in time. But it takes a little bit of time for it to build momentum and to build up speed. And even though it turns direct at 15 degrees of Aries, it's not until December 23rd. I guess you would call that Christmas Eve. December 23rd, Mars direct actually catches back up with Pluto. Now Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter are all moving direct. And in fact, it's very significant that both Jupiter and Saturn moving direct have left Capricorn for good, or at least for this time round. Jupiter won't be back in Capricorn for another 11 years. Saturn won't be back in Capricorn for another 26 years. All the planets that were in Capricorn, the Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto have now changed order because Jupiter and Saturn are moving faster than Pluto. They've both moved on into Aquarius, but now Mars direct is making its square to Pluto. And again, we're realizing that there's stuff coming out that we didn't know about. There's power struggles that were buried, that were hidden. We're bumping up into new information that is somehow changing the name of the game. And we don't know what that is yet, but that will be very important right around the beginning of the Christmas holiday season. December 23rd is the exact. But again, these are slow moving planets at this point in time. Even Mars, which normally moves quickly, is not moving very fast. That Mars moves ahead, and Mars actually moves from Aries into Taurus on January 6th. Now, that means that Mars has been in the sign of Aries for over 6 months. It moved into Aries on June 27th, and all of July, August, September, October, November, December, that's 6 months and an extra little week or so. Mars has been in Aries, and Mars slows down. Well, it's speeding up actually at speed, but its energetics in Taurus become more plodding, not plotting. That's Mars Pluto, but plodding. Mars in Taurus basically says, I'm going to finish what I started. I'm going to get the job done. But Mars moving into Taurus does another thing, and that is as it moves into Taurus on January 6th, it immediately goes, oh my God, Saturn and Jupiter are both now going to be in my range for squaring. And in fact, on January 13th, Mars makes its third and final square to Saturn. Remember, its first square to Saturn was will be, but was the end of August. That's coming up for us for present time. The second square was the end of September, and the third and final square will be on January 13th. Because remember now, Mars is playing these same planets forward for the third and final time. But the first time, Mars square hit Jupiter first, Jupiter first, Pluto second, Saturn third. Now, Mars, for the third and final time, is hitting Pluto, the square to Pluto, first. Then it hits the square to Saturn. That's the frustration, the running up against the wall. This, of course, is very close to the presidential inauguration. But by the following week, on January 22nd, Mars squares Jupiter. And this, in some ways, it's very different between Mars squaring Saturn and Mars squaring Jupiter when they were both in Capricorn, and Mars was in warrior sign, energetic, feisty superhero wanting to save the day, Aries. Now Mars is in Taurus. This is more practical. This is more grounded. And yet the squares to Saturn and Jupiter, I think, are quite encouraging, especially because we also have, and it's not really within my range of discussion today, but on the solstice, just a couple of days prior to the Mars squaring Pluto on December 23rd, on the solstice, we have Saturn and Jupiter having moved into Aquarius and them forming their one every 20-year conjunction. And this is a statement about where we're going in the future in the next decade. And I don't want to talk a lot about that right now. I'm just trying to paint the picture that as we're looking at what's going on now in August, it's impossible to get a full sense of the power of the Mars squaring Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn as it does through August. It's already squared Jupiter and Pluto. It's still coming up to Saturn. It's tied up in the discomforting, uncomfortable energy of this new moon, because the new moon is quincunx Saturn, but it really won't be until mid-end January, until the end of January, once Mars moves past its square to Jupiter, that basically frees us from this whole mess. So that's the big picture that I wanted to describe. I want to come back and just take a quick run through the end of the month between now and the 1st of September. So we're going to pick up just after the new moon on August 19th. This is Wednesday, August 19th. And we can see that the moon, we start the day with the moon still in Leo, but the moon quickly moves into Virgo early in the morning on Wednesday, the 19th. And yet the other piece that's important here is that Mercury also moves from Leo to Virgo. And in fact, as the moon and Mercury move into Virgo, we begin to get a sense of what's coming up ahead as we move from the midsummer Leo energy into the energy kind of becoming more finely tuned, getting ready for the harvest as we move through that Virgo energy. We'll talk more about that next month. As we move on, by Friday, actually on Thursday, that moon in Virgo is going to make trines with the Capricorn Council, with the Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. And I think, therefore, that Thursday and on into Friday might have a little bit of easy energy into it. On Friday, the moon actually moves into Libra. That's August 21st. On Saturday, the sun moves into Virgo. And now we're into a new part of the summer season. This is the mutable or changeable part where summer changes into the autumn. And we begin to pick up a little bit on the practicality of perhaps the show is over. How are we going to focus our energy? Incidentally, as the moon moves through Libra on Saturday and on into Sunday, the moon is now going to be making squares to the Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, and opposing Mars. So this may be a little bit of a tougher day leading that Saturday evening on into Sunday, especially because we're moving closer and closer to the exact Mars square Saturn. And if you remember correctly from our earlier charts, on the 24th, that Mars reaches 26 degrees of Aries, and it squares Saturn at 26 degrees of Capricorn. And this is a bit of a reality check that may not necessarily be a whole lot of fun. However, if we've done our work, if we've done our homework, if Saturn is satisfied that Mars hasn't been running amok and running too fast, then we actually get to pass through the starting gate anyhow, but our speed is still checked. We need to move at an intelligent rate rather than just ramming ahead as Mars is wont to do. On Tuesday, the 25th, the moon moves into Sagittarius. And also on the 25th, we have Mercury in Virgo making a trine with Uranus. This is kind of an exciting intellectual breakthrough day. Granted, we're still suffering from that Saturn being squared by Mars. That's not going to go away overnight. And yet this does lead us to believe that there is some kind of radical breakthrough that we can make, even though we feel like we have bumped up against a wall. And I think that this will come into play even more by the time that the sun moves into that 10-degree point and it squares Uranus also. On the 25th also, the sun is making a square and a half with Jupiter. I don't have this drawn in, but again, we're getting back to this overindulgent thing. We're getting back to this feeling like that in order to overcome the resistance, we may need to overstate our cause. Also on the 25th, which is a very busy day, we have Venus in Cancer making the first of its 3 oppositions to the Capricorn planets, and it will also make a square to Mars. But you can see here that it is opposing Jupiter. Again, I think we're tempted to look at the good side. We might just feel weary and finally feel like we are making some progress. I think the 25th actually has some potential for holding something up that does work. There is a bit of a problem, though, that Mercury is also forming a hard aspect, a sesquisquare with Saturn and Mars. And so there is a little bit of power to be yielded here. If you can envision from Mercury, a triangle going from Mercury to Saturn this side, and from Mercury to Mars on the other side. And this makes a triangle with Mercury at the point of it. This is referred to sometimes as Thor's hammer. It is a square and a sesquisquare and a sesquisquare. And it's a very, very powerful driving aspect. And yet I think we have a lot of other aspects that are ameliorating the energy today. We'll see what happens. Now, as we move on Thursday, the moon moves into Capricorn. That would be, let's see, that's Thursday midday. There we go, right there. The moon moves into Capricorn, and as such, that moon is coming up to, and this will actually be over the next couple of days, that moon on the 29th on Saturday and on into Sunday, that moon will join up with Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn. And you can see here that the moon at 5 degrees of Capricorn, 12 hours later, 12 hours later, we're on Saturday. The moon is now passed over Jupiter, and 12 hours later, the moon is passed over Pluto. And so I think here, and as the moon is doing that, by the way, it's also making that square to Mars. It's also making an opposition to Venus. I think this is a stressful weekend again. It seems like we get a couple of stressful weekends in a row. But we also have an alleviating factor here that plays on through the end of the month, and that is Mercury moving through Virgo makes first a trine to Jupiter, and then that Mercury will make a trine to Pluto, and then a trine to Saturn that doesn't actually complete until September. But the fact of the matter is that those trines are very useful because they give us a grounded, practical, logical way to approach things. And we can also see here that Venus is now coming into the opposition to Pluto. I mean, these are intense times. Relationship dynamics are stressed, and I don't just mean one-on-one relationships. I mean relationships with our parents, with our children, relationships with our employers, our employees, government. These are times when things are really, really heating up again. And yet the good news in all of this is that we do have Mercury coming through this picture. And as we watch that Mercury, it reaches the exact trine on September 1st, and it reaches the trine to Saturn on the 3rd. And so this does take the pressure off, but we still got a lot of stuff going with this Capricorn stuff, because remember, even though Mars is through the squares to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, we still have Venus now coming into that square to Mars. We'll talk more about this in the September forecast, because that Venus makes a square to Mars. This can be a bit of fireworks. This is on September 3rd and 4th. This can be very creative, but it certainly can be fireworks. And yet by the time we get to September 9th, we can see Mars is barely moving now. It's 28 degrees for a week. And now Mars has the S for stationary, and then it begins to move retrograde. So this is what we have for the play of the rest of the month. I've taken a little bit of a different approach for this mid-month update, because I really want everyone to understand that what's happening now is really what's the right word? It's a fractal of a larger scenario. And this larger scenario is being played through 3 times. Once on the direct motion of Mars, which is through August, then on the retrograde, which is going to be late September and into October, and then on the direct, which is December and on into January. But when we get the direct, rather than ending up with Saturn bumping up against the wall, answering to the authority, dealing with the rules or the structures which may be holding us back, which may be being broken even, by the 3rd and final time, that Mars is actually ending this scenario with a square to Jupiter, which may in fact be a time where everyone can take a deep breath in and look forward to the future. I will see you all in a few days for the September update. Thank you. And again, this is unlike the normal mid-month update, with appreciation to the to the solar Patreons. If you're interested in supporting this or getting the mid-month on a regular basis, go to patreon.com/Rick Levine. And also don't forget my Instagram, where you can get dailies. My daily planet pulse is available on Instagram at Rick Levine Astrologer, and also on Facebook at facebook.com/Rick Levine Astrologer. See you next month, or see you in a couple of weeks. Think cosmically, act locally, because acting cosmically doesn't work. I'm Rick Levine.